The Brown family, whose tale is based on love, faith, and the promise of harmony, has always been in the public eye. But anxiety has been building for years behind the meticulously manicured smiles. Christine Brown and Meri Brown, two ladies who could never quite agree, were at the center of it all. A quarrel that threatens to split the family apart has grown out of what began as little arguments, and it's all about their children this time. Christine's protectiveness toward her children has always been intense. They are her entire universe, the reason she left a marriage that no longer fulfilled her. Therefore, she was unable to remain silent when she thought Meri had gone too far in speaking to her children in a way that Christine felt was unjust or aloof. Christine faced Meri, her feelings leaking to the surface. "You don't get to treat my kids like that," she said in a loud voice, her words shaking with rage. Hey, hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up. No more. Meri, however, never gave up. She retaliated, feeling cornered, saying, "You don't get to tell me how to act. I won't let you remove me because I've worked too hard to earn a spot in this family." Years of animosity were unleashed in a single moment during the visceral and intense confrontation. Then, something unforeseen occurred. The children raised their voices. They had been torn between loyalty and silence for so long, living in the shadow of their parents' struggles. Now, though, their voices broke through the confusion. Others backed Christine, acknowledging that Meri's words and deeds made them feel uncomfortable. Others were worn out, claiming that the family was being torn apart by the ongoing strife. Although their candor was devastating, it was indisputable. The youngsters were now victims and witnesses, rather than helpless bystanders. Kody Brown, who had earlier pledged to keep everyone together, was nowhere to be seen as the feud grew more intense. The gap was simply made wider by his departure. As they unraveled in front of cameras and the world, the women and children were left to fend for themselves. Encouraged by her kids' encouragement, Christine believes the battle validated her choice to leave the multiple marriage. In the meantime, Meri became even more alone, her rage covering up the intense loneliness she had been carrying for years. The family that had purported to be one was now divided. Years of resentment, jealousy, and the gradual deterioration of a dream that was meant to keep them together were all part of the fights, which went beyond simple parenting. One thing became clear as the children's voices cut through the chaos. Christine and Meri were no longer the only ones at odds. This was how the Brown family itself fell apart. With every violent altercation inflicting more wounds, Sister Wives' future is in jeopardy. And now that the children are finally telling the truth, the question is not whether the family will disintegrate, but rather when. The Browns had always been seen as a loving, unified, and religious family. 4 women, all married to the same man, navigated their roles in a large family that captivated the world's attention and criticism. However, the foundation was never as strong as it appeared beneath the meticulously manicured grins and the assurance of sisterhood. The wounds were profound for Christine and Meri. Their relationship had been tense from the start. Warm and caring, Christine dedicated her life to raising her kids and solidified her position as the mother of the family. The first wife, Meri, bore a distinct burden, one of loneliness as well as pride. She only had one biological child, so she frequently felt alienated in a household full of children who weren't hers. At first, their differences developed subtly, through glances and snippets of discussion. Meri was frequently perceived by Christine as harsh, with comments that were able to cause pain. Meri, on the other hand, believed that Christine disregarded her and treated her as though her position in the family was getting smaller every year. These tensions existed in the background for years and hardly ever flared up in public. But each unresolved, slight, and cold conversation accumulated like tinder awaiting a flame. And that spark appeared when the arguments became personal about the kids. not about household duties or rules. This was something that Christine could not forgive. Her children were her purpose and her legacy. It was more painful than any previous disagreement when she believed Meri had gone too far with them. Whether it was with a scathing remark, a contemptuous demeanor, or a cold silence, Christine decided enough was enough. At that point, she can stop chewing her tongue. No more overlooking issues in the name of keeping the peace. Christine refused to remain silent the next time Meri pushed too hard. The scene was set. The conflict would be bigger, louder, and more ugly than anything the family had ever experienced before. And it would be the culmination of years of animosity, jealousy, and the gradual deterioration of a dream that was meant to keep them together. Cliffhanger. Christine could take no more. And furthermore, the next altercation would affect the entire Brown family, not just two women. Everyone in the Brown home could sense the tension that had been building for weeks, maybe even years. The kids had begun to hide in the corners of the house to avoid the impending storm, and meals were quieter and stares sharper. One evening, it finally broke. Tired of holding her tongue, Christine refused to back down. As she turned to face Meri, her normally soothing and maternal voice took on a sharp edge. "You have no right to speak to my children in such a manner. No more." The room went cold. Amidst the silence, there were gasps. No one was brave enough to move. Meri's pride ignited like a flame as her eyes narrowed. She had felt ignored, pushed to the side, and treated as though her position in the family might be changed for far too long. Furthermore, she had no intention of allowing Christine to dictate her role in front of the kids or anybody else. With the firm yet irate tone, she shot out, "Don't you dare tell me what I can or can't say. I have put in more effort than anyone else to secure my position inside this family. I can't be erased by you." Decades of resentment crackled in the air. It was years of loneliness, jealousy, and the never-ending struggle to be seen. Not just one hurtful remark or one child's sentiments. Christine's voice wavered as she pushed forward, her face flushed with emotion. "Meri, this is about respect. Show me some respect, courtesy toward my kids, and perhaps you don't belong in their lives if you are unable to provide them with that." The words struck like a hammer. Meri's jaw tensed, but there was a glimmer of pain in her eyes. Despite her pride and rage, the thing she feared most was being told she didn't belong. The children sat wide-eyed around them, caught in the crossfire of two women who had harbored animosity for years before this one moment. Pretending was no longer an option. The Brown family's tenuous tranquility had been upended, and everyone was aware that things would never return to normal. Cliffhanger. A child's voice emerged from the midst of the argument, just as it was about to go out of hand. After being quiet for a long time, the children were now prepared to talk. With Christine and Meri standing on opposite corners of the room and their voices sharp enough to pierce the air, the shouting had peaked. It had now exploded into the open after years of bitterness. However, just when it appeared that the argument could not become any more ugly, it did. The storm was broken by a tiny voice. The gathering fell silent as one of Christine's daughters, her eyes watering, whispered, "We feel unwelcome and it hurts." The strain broke. All of a sudden, this was more than simply a conflict between two wives. It was the suffering of the kids exposed. "Every time we're around you, Meri, it feels like we're walking on eggshells," said another child who had grown braver, "as if we're incapable of doing anything correctly." The remark struck more forcefully than any charge Christine had leveled. The children who had spent years living under the shadow of the fight knew that these were not adult resentments or trivial rivalries. No one could overlook the rawness of their voices as they sliced through the commotion, shakily but honest. Meri's expression tensed, but beneath her rage was hurt. She had never anticipated being publicly rejected by the children. Despite all of her hardships and errors, the delicate position she had established for herself in the family was destroyed when she was told she was cold, unwelcomed, and even frightened. As Christine drew her kids closer, her heart ached. She realized then that the goal of the battle was to protect her children from suffering they had not requested, not to defeat Meri. The children's gentle voices, their confessions leaking into the thick air, were the only sound in the room. Excuses could no longer be used to hide. The children had spoken, and there was no denying their veracity. Cliffhanger. As Meri left in quiet while her kids clung to her, Christine came to the realization that the Brown family will never be the same. The fallout had only started, but the damage was already done. Long after Meri left, the children's voices continued to reverberate. The family was left raw and shocked by their heartbreaking disclosures. The wives had always looked to one guy in times like these: Kody Brown, their patriarch, their husband, the man who had pledged to be the mooring in their stormy sea. But when Christine and her kids most needed him, Kody wasn't present. Later, he arrived to discover the aftermath of the storm: a house suffocated by silence, Meri fleeing in quiet rage, and Christine holding protectively to her children. The women briefly believed he would take over, heal the hurts, and be the leader he so often professed to be. Rather, Kody dismissed the altercation. It was just another quarrel, another conflict in a family that was always too emotional, in his opinion. He avoided discussing Meri's involvement at all, wrote off Christine's indignation as theatrics, and rejected the children's confessions as exaggerations. A harsh phrase could not express the depth of his apathy. The kids felt ignored even though they had summoned all their confidence to share their minds. Christine felt betrayed because she had stood firm to protect them. And without being questioned, Meri left with a sense of justification rather than responsibility. Kody's quiet was harmful rather than neutral. He had made the decision to put his personal comfort ahead of his family's recovery by refusing to choose sides. It was reaffirmation for Christine of what she had felt deep down for years. She could no longer trust Kody to keep her kids safe. For the children, it was the realization that their father's support was not assured by his presence. For Meri, it was yet more indication that she was fighting a battle that no one else wanted to join. In his own home, the man who had once pledged togetherness had turned into a ghost, and the crooks only got wider without him. Cliffhanger. Because Kody would not step in, the women and kids were left to deal with the consequences on their own. Consequences that would permanently alter the family. After the storm, Christine sat in silence with her kids huddled together, their little cries still resonating in her head. "We feel unwanted. It hurts." She knew those words were accurate and they would torment her, not because they were surprising. It was impossible to repress the truth now that it had fully surfaced. Christine had given up parts of herself for years in order to pursue the goal of multiple marriages. She had had to put up with icy silences, scathing comments, and a spouse whose focus was too divided for her kids, her beliefs, and the promise of family. She convinced herself it was worth it. However, when she looked into her children's tear-streaked cheeks, she came to the realization that the family she had been defending was no longer there. It was sealed by Kody's apathy. The men who should have stood tall for them had stayed out of the way. Christine gained new insight from his resistance to admit the hurt. She couldn't wait for him to change if she wanted her kids to grow up loved, secure, and whole. She started to make the decision, not a whisper, but a vow, that she would no longer tie her happiness or that of her kids to a dysfunctional family. Christine would leave. She would create a new existence in which her kids' opinions were valued, and she wouldn't have to struggle for meager respect. Meri, meantime, experienced the agony of rejection more acutely each day. She retreated more into her own loneliness after being shunned by Kody and separated from Christine and the kids. Meri found herself looking into stillness, wondering if she had already lost everything. While Christine found strength in her kids, once compelled to become sisters, the two ladies now found themselves at a crossroads. With her kids as her compass, Christine was heading toward freedom. Meri was becoming more and more enmeshed in the shadows of a family that had abandoned her. In conclusion, Christine had already made up her mind. The next conflict would be one of action rather than words. Leaving was no longer an option. It was now a given. After Christine made her choice, the Brown home was never the same. What had started out as private tears and murmured misgivings turned into bold, irrevocable action. She was heading out. She was abandoning the marriage, the family, and the life that had defined her for decades. Not just the dispute, not just the room, it was an earthquake of an announcement. The children were split, the other women were rattled, and Kody, who had been at the center of it all, was incredulous, as though he had never thought she would truly leave. There was no turning back for Christine. Now, the last straw had been the altercation with Meri, but Kody's silence was the last straw. With empty chairs speaking louder than words, family dinners became stressful affairs. Meri's presence grew even more aloof and frigid as the kids clung more tightly to Christine, their devotion evident. Afraid silences and betrayed trust replaced what had formerly been promoted as a united front of love and faith. Thankful that their mother had chosen them over tradition, a few of the children applauded Christine's bravery. Others found it difficult to adjust, uncertain of what family meant in the modern context. However, the change was evident to all of them. The hope of a single, large, contented family had come to an end. Meri started to rewrite her place in the family after being abandoned to simmer in loneliness and resentment. She lost her status as Christine's companion and turned into an island, hurt and angry, but holding on to the hope that her position wasn't completely removed. However, the confessions of all the crying children replayed in her head, reminding her that she wasn't wanted the way she had hoped. What about Kody? His quiet was more audible than before. He demonstrated to the world that the patriarch of the Brown family no longer controlled his home by refusing to fight for Christine, the kids, and unity. His decades-long creation was coming apart in front of everyone, including admirers and photographers. The fallout was the demise of an illusion, not just the departure of one woman. The rifts that were revealed by Christine and Meri's altercation had existed all along, just waiting for the ideal opportunity to rip the family apart. And now the world could see it for what it truly was, a tale of anger, jealousy, and a family breaking apart under its own weight, rather than a fantasy of sisterhood and unity. The Brown family was breaking apart in the final cliffhanger. The others were left to choose between following Christine's example and being stranded in the ruins while she was making her way to freedom. Christine was leaving more than just a marriage behind when she finally ended her life with Kody. She was losing a whole universe. The moment she made the decision to prioritize herself and her kids, the burden of multiple marriages, the ongoing conflicts with Meri, and the years of striving for recognition vanished. Christine was breathing for the first time in decades. Even her kids sensed it. Laughter, freedom, and the kind of tranquility they had yearned for but had never experienced fully replaced the stress that had formerly pervaded every part of the Brown home. Their mother's choice allowed children to envision a world free from the specter of war, where family signified a security rather than hardship. The colors of Christine's days changed. She explored her identity outside of the status of sister wife, leaning toward independence. There were late-night conversations with her children, singing-filled road journeys, and quiet moments of happiness that she had previously thought were unattainable. She was now smiling twice as much as she had for each tear she had wept in the Brown home. However, freedom was not without its difficulties. Leaving such a large family means leaving behind old identities, routines, and expectations. No longer was Christine only one of the wives. The world was watching her to see how she would rise, and she was her own woman. In the meantime, Christine's absence from the Brown household was evident. After the glue that prevented some of the kids from drifting apart was removed, she laughed. Her bravery cast a long shadow, making the others confront hard questions. Why couldn't they go if Christine could? Christine's leaving was a dagger to Meri. While she was still constrained by silence, resentment, and a marriage that felt more like a ghost, the woman with whom she had previously clashed was now free. Furthermore, Kody saw Christine's audacious maneuver as a challenge to his authority, rather than merely a defeat. She had disobeyed him and the family unit, demonstrating to the world that living outside of his authority was not only feasible, but also lovely. Instead of coming to a conclusion, Christine's narrative was starting over, and many who had previously been too scared to go were moved by her decision. Cliffhanger. As Christine established her new life, it was unclear if the other women would have the guts to follow in her footsteps, or if they would be abandoned in the dream's wreckage. Meri's entire world changed when Christine left. Not just the dynamics of the family. She had struggled for years to maintain her position in the increasingly diminished Brown home. But now that Christine was gone and the family was falling apart, it was hard to ignore Meri's loneliness. She frequently ended up in the quiet areas of the house, where the quietness lasted longer than she could stand. She had once dreamed of a busy family, where sisterhood and love were abundant. She was instead left with the sound of fighting, the recollection of Christine's acerbic remarks, and the hurt of the kids' rejection. She was most tormented by the voices of the children. "We feel unwelcome, and it hurts." Late into the night, those remarks kept coming back to her, eating away at her pride and causing fissures in the barrier of self-sufficiency she had constructed. Despite her obstinacy and resistance, Meri was unable to deny the fact that she had turned into the outsider. Kody did not console her. She used to detest his detachment, but now it felt like he was leaving her. She now had to confront the fact that his heart had long since moved on, even though she had previously thought that his love may return. She hardly received a glance from the guy she relied on for approval, and when he did, it was with the fatigue of someone who had already let go. Meri made a defiant effort to hide her suffering by claiming she was strong enough to stand by herself, but loneliness encircled her like a chilly shadow during the silent times when neither the world nor the cameras were present. She wasn't Christine stepping out into the world with kids in tow. She didn't find balance the same way Robyn or Janelle did. Meri was all by herself. Her tale turned into one of perseverance. Every day was a struggle against the nagging suspicion that perhaps Christine had been correct all along, and that the only path to serenity was to leave. But Meri wasn't quite ready to let go. She held on to the hope that her place was still there, ready to be found among the Brown family's wreckage. Cliffhanger. As Meri struggled with loneliness and her waning relationship with Kody, raising the question of whether she would eventually find the resolve to go or continue to fight for a love that no longer desired her. The Brown household's drama had always been silently observed by the children. They learned early on that family life wasn't always full of love, but was frequently full of conflict as they grew up in front of the cameras and under the continual scrutiny of their parents' decisions. However, the children could no longer be merely supporting characters. When Christine left, the future was being shaped by their words. Their mother's choice gave some of them courage. They also gained strength from witnessing Christine leave pain. They saw that love could exist outside of Kody's control, and that family didn't always have to be a source of turmoil. Christine's audacious move was more than just a single instance. For these kids, it served as a model for their own lives. But for some, it was difficult. All they had ever known was the idea of a single, big, cohesive family. It was like losing a part of themselves to watch it break. They held questions with no easy answers, perplexity and contempt. Would their parents ever get along in the same space? Would there ever be a complete holiday? The wound from Meri's tense connection with the children persisted. Some stayed away from her completely, still harboring past wounds, while others secretly hoped she would soften, change, or somehow reappear in their lives. But the gap just widened over time, making Meri feel even more alone. Once the center of their universe, Kody became more elusive. Many of the children started to perceive him as a man who put his pride before his family, rather than the powerful leader he had once presented himself as. As a result of his absence during their most vulnerable times, for some of the children, trust would never be restored because it had been shattered. Resilience, however, began to emerge from the ashes of the broken home. The children supported one another, forming relationships away from the strife between their parents. Together, they shared tears and laughter and created a family that was exclusively theirs, one in which they felt their opinions were valued. Kody and his wives were no longer the only part of Sister Wives history. It was about the children and how they took into the future the strength and the wounds of their childhood. Cliffhanger. As the children entered adulthood, everyone wondered whether they would continue in the same ways or rebel and permanently alter the Brown family's history. For many years, Sister Wives was founded on the premise that 4 women and 1 man could coexist peacefully, raise their children in love and faith, and disprove the notion that multiple marriages are bad. Millions of people were drawn to this audacious idea, which was also a fragile fantasy. But by the time Christine left, the flaws in that dream were too obvious to conceal. The family's disintegration was depicted on televisions all across the world, was no longer merely discussed in private. Every altercation, icy silence, and tear served as evidence that the goal of unity had failed. A tale of disintegration had replaced what had previously been a symbol of strength. Christine's departure was the first domino. Her decision to put her children before tradition made clear the imperfections that had always existed. Kody's partiality, the wives' rivalries, and the unmanageable weight of jealousy in a shared marriage. Bitter realities had replaced the appearance of harmony. Left behind, Meri struggled with loneliness and the painful realization that the love she once held onto was no longer there. Torn between independence and commitment, Janelle wondered about her own destiny. The youngest woman, Robyn, became the preferred partner and the source of conflict, causing the other wives to become resentful of her presence. And additionally, Kody Brown, the once confident patriarch, seemed more broken than his family at the center. With every day that passed by, his wives drifted away. His children spoke up, and his legacy shifted into something he was no longer able to identify. It was the end of the dream of a single, big, cohesive poly family. What was left was a story of grief rather than harmony, a family split apart by antagonism, silence, and the crushing weight of unmet expectations. But there was also a strange sort of rebirth in the wreckage of that dream. Christine was free. The children found their voices, and in her loneliness, Meri even started to doubt her own desires. The demise of the Brown family as the world knew it was a transformation, not merely a collapse. Because sometimes the only way to start living a real life is to end a fantasy. Final cliffhanger. As the cameras continued to roll, one thought remained in the minds of viewers worldwide. Was this really the end of Sister Wives, or the start of something entirely new? Let us know in your comments and stay tuned by subscribing our channel to get more updates like this. Thanks, everyone.